Thank you for joining us for NYSAPLS Young Professionals Committee discussion on what are professional standards. Today we are joined by members of the NYSAPLS Minimum Technical Standards Committee to help us with our discussion. Before we get started, I want to go over a couple items to make sure you understand how this process will work. Similar to our webinars, on the screen you'll see a screenshot of what your GoToWebinar dashboard looks like. So doing a quick sound check using the raise your hand button. If you can hear me, please raise your hand now. If you have any questions, please use the question box on your dashboard to type in any questions. At any time during the program, type in your comments and questions and the committee will address them as needed. So I see that most of your hands are up, so it looks like we're ready to go. So now I'm going to turn everything over to our Young Professionals Committee Chair, Tim Massey. Hi, Tim.
Hey, Heather. Thank you very much for that. And welcome, everybody. Really happy to have everyone attending today. We have an important topic to go through, and it's important not just as for the licensed surveyors out there, but it's also important for the young professionals, our associate members. Over the past few years, there's been a push through NYSAPLS to enact minimum standards within New York State. It's been a conversation at the executive level and at the board levels, and it's a conversation that we want to make sure that every level of membership is aware of. Today, we have members of the Minimum Technical Standards Committee, and I'd like to start with those introductions. Roy, the chairman of the Minimum Technical Standards, you do a quick introduction for me and then move on through the rest of your folks here. I think we have you on mute there, Roy.
Sorry about that. I'm Roy Garfinkel, chairman of the Minimum Technical Standards Committee and also vice president of NYSAPLS.
Shall we go in alphabetical order?
Scott, why don't you go right ahead?
Who's next? Scott Allen. I serve on the Ethical Practices Committee for NYSAPLS, and look forward, very happy to see you all here today. Look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Scott. Dan?
Hi, I'm Dan Weaver, member of the Minimal Technical Standards Committee. I'm also the treasurer of Nassau-Suffolk Regional and practice down on Long Island.
Great, thank you. How about you, Jim?
Good afternoon. Jim Vienna here from Stillwater, New York. I'm treasurer of the Eastern New York Society of Land Surveyors and a member of the MTS committee.
Excellent, thank you, Jim. And Jason Larson?
Yeah, so Jason Larson, I'm with MTS as well as the Legislative Committee and a member of the Delaware-Hudson Regional, and happy to be here.
Excellent, thank you so much. And again, thank you to all of you for joining us today. You guys have had a lot of work behind you and in front of you, and gotten a little bit of flack here and there for it. So I'm glad you guys could all join us today. So that we can really introduce these topics to the rest of our membership. We also have some of my committee members on as well. Keith, can we get a quick introduction?
Morning, my name's Keith Burley with Marks Engineering out of Canandaigua, New York.
Excellent.
Glad to be here.
Jason Peterson.
Good morning, good afternoon now. I'm Jason Peterson. I'm the owner of Bethlehem Land Surveying here in Bethlehem, New York, and I'm a member of the Young Professionals Committee, and I also serve on the board for Eastern New York Society of Land Surveyors.
Thank you. And Matt Palmer.
Hey, Matt Palmer. I'm a project surveyor at BME here in Rochester, and also vice president of Genesee Valley Land Surveyors.
Excellent. Thank you so much, everyone. So, Roy, if you're ready, let's get right into it. You want to touch off, let's see, what's a brief history of this minimum technical standards as it started here in New York? I think we got you on mute again there, Roy.
You'd think I'd know how to do this by now. So a brief history of the standards probably starts with myself and my personal experience with Genesee Valley. Back in 2015, we started an initiative in Genesee Valley. We saw a need for standards that would raise the bar of practice and commonality in our area. And we took the initiative, worked 2 years on implementing and getting approved a set of standards at Genesee Valley, which we did get approved by our own region. However, was not adopted by the local bar association. And that's when we really learned that having a set of standards or guidelines or code that's not legislated has no teeth and has nowhere to go, and really is kind of hollow. I mean, you put all the dependence on the professional to do the due diligence, and unfortunately we can't always count on that. So with that little bit of frustration, and I might add that most surveyors in Genesee Valley did and do adhere to these standards, which I think has raised the bar in that area. So I got involved with NYSAPLS as an officer in the coming years, and I think where this was really born was when I served on the Ethical Practices Committee with Scott Allen. We started to see at a state level why there was a need for standards because of the caseloads that we took in. And I think Scott and I both were like-minded when we spoke with the Board of Education that the only way to really implement change and raise the bar and get a set of standards that would rise this profession to what it can be was to move something towards legislation. So at the coming strategic planning conference back in 2017, we started discussing that in a lot of the groups. And I think that was one of the major initiatives that came out of the 2017 strategic plan, was to look into and strive for crafting a set of standards for our profession. In early 2018, President Greg DeBruin, with the go-ahead from the Board of Directors, created the Ad Hoc Minimum Standards Committee. I was asked to be chairman, which I gladly took up. We formulated a committee striving to have diversity from across the state, inclusive of as many regions as possible, and people who had differing opinions about whether there should be standards or what the standards should be. We spent 2 years in committee. We had some kind of flux with membership. Some came, some left for different reasons. We ended up with a really good core group, most of which are here today with you. And I can tell you, I thank these guys greatly because they put in great work. We discussed, we debated, we argued. This is pretty sensitive stuff and pretty important to our profession. We got points of view from all different categories. And we finally came up with a document. So after that 2 years of hard work, we brought our document to the public, to NYSAPLS. We really wanted to urge for transparency with the membership and the regions because we knew how important this was. So we had several forums, discussions. We had a large forum at the conference and offered people to come in with their differing opinions. We published the draft standards so everybody could review them. We got a lot of comments. We had some disagreements. We made some changes. We actually went back into committee after submitting and after the conference forum and took all those comments into consideration, made some edits to the document, and then the following fall, last year, in 2020, we resubmitted the MTS document to NYSAPLS for approval to move it towards possible legislation. And this is where I want to be very clear, where we've had some misunderstandings. When we had a vote in 2020 with NYSAPLS for the membership, and we wanted to take this to a membership vote rather than just a board of directors vote by the leaders, because we wanted it to be transparent and we wanted everybody to be able to chime in. When we brought it, we wanted to be very clear, this was not a vote for NYSAPLS to adopt these standards. At this point, these standards are still a draft document, and we're not seeking adoption by NYSAPLS. What we were seeking was the approval of the standards to be able to move them forward to try to get legislation. And of course, you know, the next step would be, which we're pending and waiting to do now, is we have to sit down with the State Board of Education, which, you know, plays pretty heavily into all of this. So at this point, we did pass the standards last fall by a majority vote to move forward. We've been fairly idle for the past year, waiting for to be able to have a seated discussion with CIVLs regarding this. They're currently still working through the definitions bill for our concern and trying to get that cleared out of the way before we sit down and have a discussion. However, they're very anxious. They seem to be positive. We have great hopes that we'll be able to work with them. And I'm sure after that, we'll be looking at possible revisions and ultimately coming back to NYSAPLS with a revised and approved by State Board of Education document and putting it back to the membership again. You know, here's what we got. Here's what we've worked with, and the State Board of Education approves it. Now we would like a vote to try to get it legislated. So that's the history. It wasn't very brief, but that's the history, and that's where we stand right now.
And one thing I saw when I was doing some research last night is we're actually only one of 4 states in the country that don't have a minimum standards. I think it's us, Pennsylvania, and the Dakotas are the only ones that don't.
Yep, that's a great point, Matt. I don't know if Amber and Heather have we had a map actually that we could put up. So in several of our presentations, and you can see some things have probably changed since then even, almost every state has some type of legislated standards. Some are extremely thorough, such as Florida, which we used as kind of a prime example. They're extremely thorough, and I admire a lot of the stuff I read. They're all different varying degrees of standards, but New York is one of the only states that does not have some form of legislated standards for our profession.
Interesting stuff, Roy. Appreciate that. So we have a lot of talk about these standards, and we look at where we're headed, you know, from a professional licensing standard and where we're looking at from the technical side. But, you know, some of what comes up on a regular basis is really the standards we run into on, you know, in our office, in the field, and, you know, working with agencies. You know, some of that kind of gets pushed to the side when we start to think about this. Where do we use our standards already? Dan, I know you had mentioned that you had some examples of, you know, some of the standards you have placed from your office staff. You want to just touch on that?
Sure, thank you, Tim. Yeah, I mean, I believe most, if not all of us, probably already have some type of inter-office standards that we adhere to. You know, things like, you know, proper methods for deed research, you know, preparing deed plots for field crews before they're heading out in the field, standardized coding systems for our side shots for plotting, standardized, you know, ways of preparing our CAD files or whatever method of mapping we're using. I think this is all fairly, you know, normal to us within our own office. And I think the challenge here is, obviously we're not looking at standardizing those items per se with the minimal technical standards, but creating some type of uniform method of standardizing things is part of our profession and something we already do. And this is just kind of an expansion of what we'll probably all already do within our offices.
That's excellent. I think it really is. And Jim, you had some examples even in the field, right?
Yes, thank you, Tim. Certainly, when we go out to do a field survey, we have simple standards, just as simple as what equipment needs to be placed in a vehicle. Obviously, we want to have the right tools to do the job. When you get to the job, we have general standards, whether it's a field book or a data collector you're using. You're going to put who's on the crew, the weather, so on and so forth, how you describe your control, your coding, as Dan mentioned. When you're setting corners, we have standards. We're going to try to use, for myself, 5/8 rebar with a plastic cap. Would we put a wood stake in? No, probably not. With an iron rod being obviously a more permanent marker. So we have, every profession has their own general standards, and implementing a set of standards would help the industry, I believe.
Thanks, Jim. And you're really speaking my language. I know there's a couple folks on the line here who've I've had the pleasure to work with and have worked with me, and they know a thing about me and lists. I love a good list. If I can keep track of something and not have to do it a second time and template it after I do it the first time, I am right there. So I'm sure you have a couple folks on the line who are laughing, thinking of my day to day. Scott, I know you have a real mind for the licensing and the legislation side, and really the professional side of these standards. So what are some of the things that we deal with already that, some of the agencies and things that are in play?
Yeah, sure, Tim. Thanks. Yeah, standards, as you're probably learning, are nothing new. They've been in place for a long time. One example is our NYSAPLS code of practice for land surveys. When we're talking about the title industry, which we're all familiar with, our surveys are often certified as meeting the code of practice for land surveys. The title industry, banks, attorneys rely on are adhering to that code of practice for land surveys. That's become a widely adopted procedure in the title industry, although they're not legislated. Also, I'll get this on the camera, but the State Board for Engineering and Land Surveying has had in place for many years land surveying practice guidelines. And the work that we've done in the committee with Roy here is we're familiar with the practice guidelines, and we sort of took those and spun off those and have tweaked them to reflect what we do in the real world. And again, legislating some set of standards is really beneficial for our consumers. It provides a consistency of our products out there. Consumers will know what they should be getting when they read these standards, and we start referring to these standards. Because right now we see a lot of things on the ethics committee, maps that come in with very, very, very little detail. You see 4 lines, distances maybe, not always bearings, the location of some sort of structure, not sure what it is, not sure how far it is from property lines. Don't know if there's any easements that cross the property. And, unfortunately, the consumers they're not experts in our field. They don't know what to expect. But it's not fair to the consumers to end up with a product like that. So we're hoping that legislating standards will benefit our consumers.
Excellent, Scott. And I think that's a key thing here, is that the overall intent of everything that we're all trying to do, whether we agree with, X, Y, or Z at all this, is everyone's really just trying to better the profession through greater service to our customers. I think that's a key thing that sometimes gets lost in the mire of the technicalities here. Jason Larson, I know you have another example to kind of touch on here. You want to jump in?
Sure. Yeah, I just want to expand on what Scott was saying. One of the key things that we started with here was the idea that out in the marketplace these days, there is a wild variation between what we all perceive as standards versus what our customers think of as standards. What are they expecting to get? And part of this was to try and provide some minimum standards, in the sense you got to remember the name of the committee and the name of the thing we're pushing here is minimum standards. That doesn't mean that you can't go above and beyond that. You certainly can, but we tried to identify things that were the bare minimum that you need to do, and have that be pointed at the consumer, and so that the consumer, when they order a survey, they understand what it is that they expect to get a certain product. Both from people like homeowners to banks and title companies and things like, and everybody involved. And so trying to standardize those things and get it to where we're protecting the clients, because all the time, I get clients to come along and say, well, I expected this or I expected that. And, this other person did this or this other person did that. And so the idea here is to try and provide that framework, to where everybody is more or less on a level playing field. All professionals understand that, these are the things that, when you call yourself a surveyor and you call your product a boundary survey or a title survey or whatever, that at least these minimum things are going to be met. And I think that's pretty important, because I think we've all run across folks in our professional careers that maybe didn't always include all the things that they probably should have. And so that's, part of the issue is to try and bring everybody up to, it's about elevating the profession and less about putting additional restrictions on the profession.
Excellent. Keith, I know you actually were just mentioning prior to this call an interaction you have with the client that dealt in this. Want to touch on that?
Yeah, thank you, Tim. I was actually just speaking to one of my clients this morning about standards, and he works for a construction company. And at that construction company, they do their own topo surveys. So he offered to do a topo survey for me to decrease a proposal cost. And I had to walk him through what we find acceptable for our standards in our office, and explain that if we're going to do a topo survey and provide that mapping and the site plan to go on with that, that our licensed professional has to have the confidence in the field work and the research and the data, the standards, the monument location, and in order to ensure that accuracy and the precision that our office expects, that our field crew has to be the people out in the field doing the work. So I had to walk through him what we expect and those accuracies and precision levels that we expect as an office, as a team, and basically say, I don't know how you do things, so therefore our licensed professional won't be able to sign and stamp that existing conditions map based on that information, that data acquired in that topo survey. It would be nice to be able to provide that client with a document showing, hey, these are the minimum standards that you would have to abide by during that survey. So I can see the value in the minimum technical standards from the client side as well. It'd be helpful.
Jason Peterson, that conversation had to get you fired up to hear that. Give me your take on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would just be touching on what he just said, what Jim said, what Scott said, and Jason Larson said. It's not uncommon to do some land records research and pull a map and actually see that it doesn't have that this meets the minimum standards of adopted requirements of the board. It's just, you'll be missing that blurb, so you'll know what to expect. While at the same time, what Jim was saying, when we have our standards to elevate the profession, I would be doing my entire industry a disservice if I didn't make sure my field crew was adhering to certain standards that I expect other companies to have, because their employment with me may not be forever. So when they move on, I would like to elevate the other members of the industry with a certified a level of expertise that I'm going to be sending on to them, so they can adhere to at least, like Jason was saying, a minimum technical standard. So yes, it would be great to have some sort of document that that I could teach from, and know that I'm sending on a better experienced crew for whomever is going to receive them.
That was a really interesting take on that. And Matt, how about you from a project perspective? You have to have a take on this, correct?
Yeah, something that I'm thinking of is that even before you get a job and you're giving somebody a cost on a survey and they want to know, what do I get for my money? They can look, section 2, boundary survey. It gives a definition of what a boundary survey is. They can read that, and that's what your minimum is that you're going to give them, and they'll know what they're paying for.
And I think that's a key point that everyone is really touching on here is expectations and setting expectations. A hard part for us is that there are folks out there, and I think that everyone's alluding to it, that set very low expectations of themselves and set low expectations to their customers. And ultimately what's happening is their customers are the ones who potentially are being damaged due to this. So, setting expectations is really the key for what we do as professionals. And I think, your group here is really looking to push that beyond the individual and push that to the legislative state. So, Roy, speaking to that, we now have heard the benefits behind the standards and a little bit about what your group is doing. Where are we headed? What is it? What is the path forward for your group? What's the path forward and in the future state, if you will, for the profession here in New York State with regard to the MTS?
Well, Tim, if we can take this thing to the finish line like we want to, get something very close to what we already have on paper legislated, I see a great outcome. There are some naysayers for sure, but in my mind, these standards, number one, they benefit the general public, and that's kind of what our license is all about. Well, it is what our license is all about. It's the number one oath that you make as a professional, is that you're to serve the general public the best you can. I see these standards making a better networking and cooperation between surveyors across the state, raising the levels of performance, raising the levels of quality of surveys, all which is going to behoove not only our own profession, but the general public who deserves it. On the ground, it's going to be even after legislated, it's going to take time. It's going to take time and cooperation, and I think as Jason said, I think it's about us taking the responsibility of wanting to spread a better future of surveying through these standards to the people we teach. And I think if we can hold the people that are coming through and becoming surveyors, you know, teaching them, these are the standards that you have to work to, that, you know, that it will slowly just better our profession in general.
Yeah, thanks, Roy. Hey, Scott, do you have a piece there? Because I know you've been really
Where are we
ingrained in
at
this from the beginning.
with the,
Sorry, Tim, say that again.
Do you have a little bit to add to that?
Yeah, where we're going in the future with this is, you know, in terms of the title industry, if we have the standards legislated, what that basically is going to do is replace our code of practice for land surveys. This is a voluntary system that we have here. If these new standards become legislated, on your maps, you'll be certifying that your survey meets instead of the minimum standards set forth in the code of practice adopted by NYSAPLS, you'll be certifying that your survey meets the minimum standards set forth by state legislation. It could be in the form of rules and regulations of the State Board for Engineering and Land Surveying, or it could be, actually it could end up being adopted as a chapter law, a session law that we'll be referring to when we certify our surveys in the future. That's where we hope we're going.
where are we
Yeah,
at in
so-
that process? Here's a question. Where are we at in that process of getting it legislated, and what's the timeline looking like?
Yeah,
Well-
Roy, you covered that earlier. I think if you want to reiterate where we are and in the process, again, that would be good.
Well, Matt, you know, when you ask how long is it going to take to get something legislated, that is a really tough question, because you could just look at our definitions bill that's been spinning around for 15 years. A lot of that is going to depend on what happens with the State Board of Education, how quickly we can work through, you know, having a commonality with them and an agreement that we'll both be in agreement that this is good to move forward. I can tell you for a fact there's going to be other battles that we haven't even dreamt of yet, with other professionals that are going to be at odds with some of these possibly. So, you know, I don't think we can put a direct timetable on it. If everything went as smooth as possible, you know, back and forth, maybe in a year, we could be trying to approach a legislator to back our bill and to take it forward for us. That's pretty hopeful, I would think. So I'm guessing the time range, you're talking anywhere a year to 3 years at best, and probably more than that in reality. So it's just, you know, you're talking about the legislative process, which is pretty tough to get through sometimes. I would like to, Tim, if I could just for a moment back up to your last question again. What I think we're also going to see, like, coming out of this in the future is, and the big one is two things that strike me as accountability, and that's because these would be enforceable once they're legislated. And accountability, I think, would be just a huge thing for our profession. There wouldn't be loopholes to get out, and if you were taking them, you'd be taking them at your own risk for sure. The other thing is, I think it's going to bring a much greater understanding to the general public about what we do, who we are, and what's expected of us. So I think it's going to educate the clients and put some power in their hands too. because if it's legislated and you contract to do a certain level of work for your client, you know, they will now be able to hold you accountable for it. So I think that's going to be a big thing in the future for this as well.
I think it's a question that I think I might have, and maybe some of the other folks out here have. If we have, as Scott identified earlier, that code of practice, and we're moving towards legislation, what's the difference? Jason Larson, you prepared to answer that? I think we have you on mute though.
Yep. Again. So yeah, I was actually just about to chime in with that as a suggestion. So good pickup. Yeah, basically, as Scott mentioned there, you know, these standards that we've developed largely follow the guidelines that are already in place. The big difference is that the guidelines that are in place are NYSAPLS guidelines, and they're you know, the State Board of Education guidelines, and they're just that, they're guidelines. Pretty much all of the language in those documents is should, you know, it's a good idea to do this, blah, 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 that kind of thing. Whereas what we primarily have changed and through lots of discourse was we took all those shoulds and made them shalls. And the big difference is these are not necessarily guidelines anymore. These are, you're going to do this. This is what you should do as a minimum. And if you're not doing them, then you run afoul of the guideline, or of the standard, I should say. And so like Roy was saying, that then provides accountability. The way the current guidelines are written, they're written in such a way that with all those shoulds, that if a surveyor doesn't follow those suggestions, there's no consequence, right? It's a should. There's nothing that holds me to says I have to do this. So largely, you know, a lot of people kind of look at those guidelines and go, yeah, those are nice, but we don't have to do those things. And so that's part of the idea here and honestly, these are minimum standards. Personally, had I written this on my own, you know, these standards would have been much more stringent. But, you know, a lot of the things that we're asking for, I personally think are definitely would be considered minimums. And so it does provide some accountability later. You know, if these things don't happen, then, you know, then the surveyor is on the hook for it, basically and it goes to that sort of raising the bar of performance. You know, it's these are minimums. You know, these are the bare minimum that you have to do.
That's excellent. And you speak about accountability. Jim, do you think that you could just review for us kind of who holds surveyors accountable today versus who would hold surveyors accountable should the legislation be pushed through?
Sure, I'll take a stab at it. You know, with standards, the title industry identified a long time ago that standards were necessary for an insurable product. They worked with NSPS and Alta, and they came up with the standards that we use today for most commercial projects, the Alta standards. It provides for consistency of product that they can judge whether you have met those standards or not. Another quick thing I just wanted to touch on is there's also a positive aspect to standards beyond just standards. As the young professionals, as they move up and become licensed and start having to do proposals, they're going to find that, you know, people will expect a survey done for, I'll just throw out a number, $500. And then they'll say, well, geez, I got ranged from $500 to $1,500. Well, a lot of that is because there's not standards in place that the surveyor is expected to achieve. So one positive aspect of standards will be that it will certainly help in pricing jobs, and I think that in turn will keep the confusion away from the person ordering that survey.
Excellent. Hey, Scott, do you want to just touch on the Board of Education and its implications and how this ties into everything there?
Yeah. Well, the State Board of Education actually falls under the Board of Regents. If we accomplish this through rules and regulations, it would likely be through the Board of Regents. They would implement a new rule and regulation that we would have to adhere to, as opposed to if it became legislation. If it became legislation, it would probably end up as an amendment of the state education law. That's the 7200s that you see, which are actual statutes under state education law. And then the other thing too, I'd like to point out just quickly, Tim, if I can, because I was just going over a contract this morning that was sent to me from an engineering firm. And in it spoke about the normal standard of care. And that's a very typical clause in contracts, is the normal standard of care. What is the normal standard of care? I think if we can get these standards legislated, that'll widely answer that question. What is the normal standard of care in your area of practice? I think if we can come up with these legislated standards, it'll answer that question.
Hey, Tim, can I backtrack on something a minute? Okay, so I think you asked something about how enforceability is carried out now, as opposed to how the standards would affect that. So just to touch on that again, I mean, right now we all know about the OPD, which is the Office of Professional Discipline.
Right. I just want to stop you for 1 second.
Okay.
Let's not assume that anyone on this call knows about the OPD. Let's stop there and let's backtrack. Some of the folks who are on here right now today are in school or out in the field listening. So let's start at the beginning there. Thank you.
Okay, I got you. So right now in our profession is basically policed or regulated only by the State Board of Education. And that's basically through the license that we're granted as land surveyors. So their power, they have the State Board of Education has a department called the Office of Professional Discipline, the OPD. Very lightly staffed, can never keep up with its work. There's a lot of complaints in our profession that, you know, this is an area that is not given enough attention. You know, when people complain about unscrupulous surveyors and so forth, that there's no recourse or way to go. And part of the reason there's not much recourse is because the only thing that they can police is the license. You know, they basically, their only power is to suspend or revoke a license. And at this point, the only thing that they can rest their hat on, and this is coming straight from discussions with Jane Blair at the Board of Education, all they have to use to go after surveyors that are being unscrupulous is contract. So, you know, if you have a contract that you were supposed to do A, B, C for this client and you didn't, then that gives them something to go after. Other than that, they don't have any teeth and they don't have an ability to say, well, a surveyor should be, you know, shall be doing this. And a surveyor, you know, as a professional has to do A, B, C. So if these standards are legislated and passed, you know, it changes the whole ballgame, because now it gives power, you know, and somebody asked me the other day, so who's going to enforce this? Well, the fact is now it's a legal issue. So the person, the actual complainant or the actual client now is empowered to go through the legal process after the surveyor, because the surveyor has not satisfied the standards and has broke the law. So, you know, and I'll make an important point here, recognize an important thing here, that's part of what scares a lot of people that are against the standards, that there's more liability, you're putting power in our client's hands and so forth. But, you know, at the end of the day, that's what they deserve, you know, and if we could say as professionals, we want to be altruistic and diligent, you know, and seen that way, then we shouldn't be scared of those things. So yes, it gives a great deal more power for holding the surveyor accountable.
As you're going through this, and I've had the pleasure of hearing this conversation, the controversy, the arguments quite a few times. One of the things, as you're saying that to me, I'm hearing is it fair as an estimation to say that currently OPD, or Office of whatever it is, has to evaluate cases on a case-by-case basis, and essentially, if the public comes to them with a complaint, they must act upon it. Whereas perhaps if there's a set of standards, some of those complaints can kind of be immediately thrown out. Is that a fair case to say, or?
Well, you know, that's a good point, Tim, because in a way that can turn around and work to protect the land surveyor as well. Yes, if there's a set of standards, we're going to know, you know, what the bar is and what our surveyors should be held to. That could work for the client, that could work for the surveyor. And it may take actually a lot of the legal issue away from the OPD and the Ethical Practices Committee, and it may put it in a court of law, you know, rather than that. So yeah, it could be a big game changer in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know that I'd really thought of that prior to today, that what it also does is it puts the public to meet a certain standard to bring a complaint against us, instead of it being subjective in communication. Interesting. So obviously we've touched on a little bit of the controversy of this. There's things that go from the legislation side, the liability side. Jason Larson, I know you've had this conversation at regionals, at larger meetings with individuals. Talk to these people on this line right now and tell us why we need this. Why is this the benefit for us?
Well, I mean, a lot of the reasons that we've already talked about. Part of our goal from the very beginning was to elevate the profession in the sense that, making clear standards to where, somebody new coming into the profession or coming into doing work in New York State from other states, things like that. Here's a document that can be pointed at and says, all right, these are the rules. This is what you're expected to do at a minimum. And, that levels the playing field a little bit, a couple other people have mentioned it, you do get wildly varying degrees of product, from depending on where you're at within the state versus, down the block. You got somebody that comes in and undercuts you, and it's because they're doing half the amount of work that you're doing. So part of this is, trying to level the playing field so that the consumer, understands okay, at a minimum, this is what I'm going to get. So that was number one. We do have issues with our profession. It's not unique to New York. I mean, I think this is in general across the country in a lot of places where, our profession is slowly dying, to be honest. We don't have enough people coming in, and part of the problem here in New York, I think, is because of a lot of the back and forth with our own colleagues, our own people, arguing over this, that, and the other, or trying to keep things to themselves, so to speak, is a big problem for encouraging people to even get into the profession in the first place. So, this helps with that a little bit. Obviously there's other ways to hopefully to solve that problem down the line, but this feeds into that part a little bit as well. But it's mostly about trying to protect the consumer, and as well at the same time as bringing our profession up to a little bit higher level across the board. This is not designed to single out any particular individuals or even groups of individuals within the state or the profession. So it's to try and bring everybody up. High tides float all boats, and so that was sort of the idea.
I love that one. Big fan of idioms. I would encourage it. I know we have some controversy. We have a little bit of time, but if there's any folks who on the line who are interested in asking a question, perhaps we can get that posed to this group right here, right now. While we wait to see if there's any other item there. Hey, Jason Peterson, you're running your own shop. How does this feel to you? How do you feel about MTS? How do you implement standards in your smaller shop?
That is a great question. I actually started surveying in Florida, and I'm very familiar with how the Florida standards started to evolve when I had first started. Even though I'm not licensed in Florida, I do have friends and people that endorsed my license that are down there. So I'm sort of familiar with it, but the way that I promote the standards here in my office is exactly how it was already touched on, with the coding to be universal. So one person's not doing one thing versus one person's doing another thing. And that allows somebody else on the inside to be able to draft it appropriately because it's all coded the same. And that helps out, actually helps out the industry for when we send off the drawing to the engineer, and they have to interpret our drawing, and they can look at the codes and see how everything is, and it meets those standards. They'll know what the line types are. They know what everything is. DOT has the same sort of standards that you have to adhere to when you send things off to DOT. So I'm actually embracing the entire idea of standards, whether it be for monumenting or other technical standards of land records research, boundary closures, etc. I really think that it's to the benefit of the public when it is law to give them another avenue of recourse, while at the same time I thought it was a beautiful example of how it could also help us by saying we don't actually have to do that, so that's not against the law. So if we're adhering to all these standards, I just think that it's going to be a great thing.
It's excellent, Jason, and thank you. It's always insightful.
And I'll add on a little bit to that too, as well as I grew up in Florida, and so some of the talk about Florida came from me. So I was licensed in Florida originally, and so then I moved to New York about 15, 16 years ago. And the situation down there is that they have a very robust standards, and it's very well enforced, and it's very well, it basically lets everybody know what it is that they're supposed to do. And moving to New York, coming to the state of affairs that we have here, was a massive culture shock for me. I had been a professional for quite a while, and then and used to that sort of environment where you had these rules that you knew what you needed to do. And coming here, it was there was nothing essentially, and it was very it was a cold shower. You know, it was definitely not comfortable. So I think that there's a flip side to this where letting people know what they need to do is a big benefit to our profession, you know, at a minimum.
Bro, do you have something for us?
Well, Tim, I'd just like to say one thing getting near closing, and the whole reason we came here, especially excited to talk to the YP committee, is this is really something that's going to be in your laps. This is something that's in motion, something that could have a very profound effect on your careers for the next 20, 30 years. So it's extremely relevant that you guys are part of the discussion, that you're educated on what's going on, that you're familiar with the standards, because, you know, if everything goes the way we hope it will, this is going to be your doctrine. This is going to be what's going to rule the way you practice. So talking to you, and I love this committee because you guys do great work. But staying involved, you know, we'd like to see if any of you guys are interested in working with us in any way. You know, we're going to need some support the next couple of years. So be involved and be aware, and really appreciate you guys taking your time with us today.
Thank you, Roy. And I think that's a great message too. A little message about me. The reason I became involved in NYSAPLS was some years back when NYSAPLS was moving legislation towards eliminating the experience only requirement for surveyors. Myself, as a surveyor who is licensed through experience only, I took, it's a nice way to put that, I sat against it. I showed up at the meeting. The next board meeting I sat in, showed up and said my piece. I was the only person there, sorry guys, under the age of 50 at the time. It takes a little bit of gumption and a little bit of time to participate. It certainly does. But I'm now a licensed surveyor. Thankfully, I was able to be licensed through experience only. Now myself and my colleagues here on this line in the YP committee are working towards ensuring that every person who would be licensed through that experience only is going to get licensed before that 8 years comes up. That's my passion for this committee. And if your passion is regarding minimum standards, technical standards, advancing the profession, I really would encourage every person who's on here, reach out to your regional. Your regionals have this information. The conversations are being had. If they're not, contact NYSAPLS, contact Heather, contact Amber. They will put you in touch with any member on this screen that you want to speak to. The conversations can be had. We can make a difference. Let's make sure that if you have an idea and you want to make a difference, you don't decide to do it too late. So I would encourage everyone, really, you know, it takes a little bit of time, but I'll be honest, it's about 2 hours a month that I sit at this computer and speak to folks. And I like to believe that we've done something good. So in that, I'd like to close. I'm going to throw this back to Heather and Amber, who I believe can still be on the line. I'm not really sure. We'll listen for them for a minute.
Yes, I'm here.
There we are.
Thank
Heather,
you,
I know you're going to have some closing words. Again, thank you to everyone here and everyone that's joined us today. I hope that you've learned some things here. If you have comments, concerns, questions, this is the group of people to talk to. We have a forum on NYSAPLS. You can speak to these folks directly, and listen, they'll come and meet you at your regional and actually have those conversations. So I would encourage every associate member that's out there that's listening to this, get informed, find out about it, because it's going to affect you and it's going to affect me and everybody else here. These guys on the line, you know, it's going to affect them for a little while.
All right, guys. Well, thank you. And before we sign off, I'd like to thank everyone once again for joining us today, and a big thank you to our YP committee and our Minimum Technical Standards Committee for their time and dedication to our organization. A short evaluation will be sent by email this afternoon, so take your time and fill it out to provide feedback for our YP committee. Thanks again for attending, and have a great weekend.
Heather, is there any way we
Oh,
can,
yes.
I'm sorry, it's my fault. I forgot to point it out, but if we could show the people where they can find information about MTS and the link to the actual document, I think we had that ready, and I probably should have said something earlier. I apologize.
I just
The
put a
link
link.
to the document for, yep. Sorry, Amber, go ahead.
That's okay. In the chat, I just put a link to the MTS info page. If you don't see it, just go to our website, and it's www.nisapples.org/page/MTS-info. And we can email that out as well. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.